Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 3rd of October 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, it's a glorious day here in Plymouth. Blue sky and sunshine. We had a pretty good weekend as well, so it looks as though we might have a nice autumn in October at least. And reports of sunshine from other places in UK. So on that happy note, we'll end on for the weather, and Mike is going to bring in, if you're of a weak disposition, look away.
Yes, because the other happy note is Brexit means Brexit, apparently, and we're going to make a success of it. This was Theresa May's speech at the Tory party conference. Let's see what she was saying. Let me be absolutely clear, there'll be no unnecessary delays to invoking Article 50. That's what she said. Unnecessary delays, Brian, that was the key word. And she went on to say, we will invoke Article 50 when we're ready, and we'll be ready soon. We'll invoke Article 50 no later than March next year. What's next? The UK is going to be a fully independent and sovereign country again, apparently.
That's an interesting statement, Mike, because it is recognition that while we were in the tied up with the European Union, we'd actually lost our sovereignty, lost our independence, all the things that they continued to say is not true, she's now admitting was perfectly true.
Perfectly true, absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, what she also announced was the Great Repeal Bill, which apparently is going to repeal the European Communities Act 1972. Or is it? Because it's a bit unclear. They're going to repeal the act. But then David Davis was talking about this yesterday. He said it's very simple. At the moment we leave, Britain must be back in control, and that means the EU law must cease to apply. Right? That's what he said. EU law must cease to apply, and in the next breath, weasel words and all that, he said to ensure continuity, we'll take a simple approach. EU law will be transposed into domestic law wherever practical on exit day. So we're in the situation which is exactly what we said from the beginning. They're not going to take us out of the European Union, or they're going to make some noises in that direction, but effectively nothing will change. The policy agendas continue. The trade policy agenda continues. All the EU law will continue to apply. They're not going to close the borders. Nothing changes.
And the military integration continues apace as well. Interesting that they use domestic law. So we're not talking about common law. We've got a new phrase now coming in which helps blur everything. We're calling it domestic law. So yeah, we're going to come out of the European law, and we're just sort of going to move it across into UK.
Yes, because we've got to have continuity. And then he went on, you see, to say it will be for elected politicians here to make the changes to reflect the outcome of our negotiation and our exit. But that doesn't mean anything, because there's so much European law which is just going to be moved across to domestic law in one fell swoop. There's so much of that there's no possibility of the House of Commons actually producing an agenda to deal with it. And the other point here is that when he says that elected politicians will make the changes, what he's actually talking about is mainly secondary legislation, so statutory instruments, many of which pass along under the radar and never get any coverage in the media and so on. So in fact, much of the changes that he says will reflect the outcome are probably going to be hidden.
When I look at this stuff, Mike, I'm fascinated as to what we're actually observing. Is this a man who is unbelievably ignorant, or is he devious? Does he know perfectly well what's going on, and so he's now prepared to lie to the British public? The moment you start to ask the simple question, how can you do this if you know what the truth is, you start to, I think, get a picture of what these politicians are about. And most of it seems to me lies and deceit. And we'll bring a bit more of that in shortly.
Well, right now, in fact. Here's Andy Burnham. Now, he's been complaining following all this because, of course, he's pro-EU. And, he says that we live in strange political times. We now have a different government with completely different priorities to the one elected in 2015. And, of course, he was part and parcel of the group of MPs which brought in the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So if he's complaining about the fact that there hasn't been a general election, that there won't be a general election until 2020 and whatnot, since Theresa May became Prime Minister, then it's mostly his fault, because he certainly didn't vote against it. He was absent, in fact, for a vote to repeal the Fixed Term Parliaments Act of 2014, so he didn't even bother to turn up. And there's just the sheer hypocrisy in this, because, of course, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown
did exactly the same thing. Yeah.
So, back in your bubble, in your box, I think, for Mr. Burnham.
So it's all words and part of the puppet show to keep people confused. Well, somebody who hasn't been confused is, I believe he's 81, the former Major General from the Royal Marines, Julian Thompson. And he's been speaking out, and he said this: a great deal of misinformation was put before Brexit polling day about defence and security. This included the attempt to conceal the fact that a joint French-German paper had been written outlining the intention to form a European defence structure. Now, what I'm particularly picking up on here is he's calling it misinformation, that is misinformation from the government about the blatant attempts to get this European defence structure set up. And of course, it's still only been the UK column that talked about the meetings that took place with the Franco-British Council prior to the first strategic defence review. So meetings with the British ambassador in Paris with the Franco-British Council, at which David Cameron was setting up jointly with the French what Britain's strategic defence policy would be. So we might call it misinformation. We prefer to call it treason, but interestingly enough, it takes an 80-year-old former general to pick up on this. But he went on, so let's just bring this in. This is what he had to say. Thanks to your hard work. Now, he was talking to the Veterans for Britain group. Thanks to your hard work, we have escaped that particular trap. Now we must do all we can to ensure that our country leaves the EU with the best deal for Britain. This includes securing our defence and security by standing ready to counter any future disinformation, including attempts to undermine NATO by overplaying the European Union's defence ambitions. So if we just summarise that, he's identified that the government is using misinformation and disinformation, and we're just going to ramp it up, because if we put this lot together, what we clearly see is the Conservative British government prepared to lie and deceive the public. And of course, what we're really seeing is propaganda in order to keep the public confused about what is really going on. So all of the information that we are getting from the Westminster end, and of course, in previous news editions, we've had Dave Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives pointing out that this integration of British military into the European army system, the military system, is continuing apace despite Theresa May talking about Brexit. So utter lies, I think.
Well, here we've got Priti Patel, and she's been sharpening her talons there. The UK has announced that it is setting out, it's creating some long-term, what they describe as support for a stable, secure and prosperous Afghanistan by 2020. This is new assistance, £750 million over the next 4 years. What are they going to do? They're going to push for private sector-led growth, focusing on better regulation and reduced corruption. I'm not quite sure how the British government is in a position to sort that problem out for Afghanistan, but there you go. Agriculture prosperity was the key one for me. Agriculture prosperity while reducing rural poverty by increasing rural incomes by £34 million and creating 15,000 new jobs, including 1,500 for women by 2018. So that's going to be great for the financial system, because clearly we're pumping in £750 million, many millions of them going towards the farming industry, where the main cash crop these days is
opium.
Indeed.
So can we just say, isn't it remarkable that this government and people like Mr. Patel so arrogant that they talk about creating a stable system in Afghanistan, but they can't achieve it in UK on the doorstep. this country cannot be described as stable at the moment. There's no stable employment, there's no stable education, nothing is stable about UK. They can't deal with UK, but we can sort out Afghanistan. Or the priority is the opium crops.
Well, indeed, but of course there'll be a geopolitical purpose in this as well. Afghanistan strategically important. And in the meantime, this is Harriet Baldwin, and she's been running off to the United States to meet the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense to discuss UK's relationship with the US, our special relationship, our preeminent ally. They are at the heart of our national security. And she was talking about US-UK security partnership in the broadest, deepest, and most advanced of any two countries, as close allies in NATO, permanent members of the UN Security Council, and leading nuclear powers. Close cooperation is vital to international peace and security. And she said the UK's relationship with the US, our preeminent ally at the heart of our national security. It is a pleasure to meet the Deputy Secretary and business leaders to discuss ways in which our two countries can continue to innovate, cooperate, and build mutual security and prosperity with defence projects like the F-35B Lightning and P-8A maritime patrol aircraft. So there you go, Brian.
I just look at her in her little flowery outfit, and she was selecting that from her wardrobe and deciding, what shall I wear when I go over to America? And I need something a little bit light and fluffy in order to discuss who we're going to murder next with a drone strike.
Yes.
It's pretty interesting psychology, isn't it? I'll just wear that nice little number and we'll just discuss who we're going to murder next.
Indeed. And in the meantime, America ramping things up in the South China Sea. This is Ash Carter. Some people calling him Nuclear Ash Carter. But anyway, he was absolutely having a rant about the China situation, South China Sea situation. He was on the USS Carl Vinson. He said that the US remains the region's strongest military and security partner of choice in the South Pacific. And they're going to beef up large new investments. There's going to be historic change. China is rising, which is fine, but behaving aggressively, which is not.
Whatever nuclear power stations in UK? Well, they're behaving aggressively, so this is just the country to come in and restore our nuclear infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah. He went on to say Beijing sometimes appears to want to pick and choose which principle it wants to benefit from and which it prefers to try and undercut. The hypocrisy in this is spectacular. For example, the universal right to freedom of navigation that allows China's ships and aircraft to transit safely and peacefully is the same right that Beijing criticizes that other countries for exercising in the region. Well, it has to be said the Russians didn't like this too much. And the Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying that the United States is prepared to use its nuclear capabilities in the event of an armed conflict involving Russia in order to prevent it from using nuclear weapons to repel aggression. This is what Carter was saying, and he went on to say, and so it wasn't just China, it was Russia as well, and the Russians pretty unhappy about the situation, making pretty strong statements in return. So this just continues to be ramped up. David Ellis last week said that what the West is aiming for is a small war with Russia and China, but of course that is never going to happen.
Yeah.
If there's any war, it's going to be a big war.
Indeed. And I found it interesting. I was talking to a gentleman over the weekend who popped in to see me, and out of the blue, he suddenly said things are looking really serious in Syria and the Middle East. And I thought, it's coming home to roost. People are beginning to pick up on it. But just to force that point, we are told that China is an aggressive power, and we have the same country being brought in not just to sort out hospitals, but to actually put in strategic nuclear infrastructure.
Yep.
So this is impossible. So this is propaganda, and they're being caught out.
Yes. Okay. In the meantime, then, Russia is cooperating with Egypt and holding drills in Africa. This report here from TASS saying for the first time, Russian airborne troops will hold joint drills in Africa for the first time with Egyptian forces and practice destroying illegal armed groups in the desert. For the first time in history, a unit of Russian paratroopers plans to arrive in Africa with their own equipment to participate in joint international drills. and they said it will develop common approaches to issues of cooperation when performing joint actions to localize and destroy illegal armed groups in the desert. Could that be ISIS, i.e., British and American special forces and their mercenaries?
Forces that they're lining up ready to help blow Africa apart as the next step. I think they won't. I think they could be, Mike.
Right, and well, this was an interesting story because it bears some relevance to what's going on today. So this is the Sunday Times, and a joint thing between the Sunday Times and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and they're pointing out that the Pentagon awarded it was a $540 million contract to Bell Pottinger, which is a UK PR firm. It was the PR firm that did Margaret Thatcher's PR, amongst others. And Lord Bell has confirmed to the Sunday Times, according to this article, that the firm had worked on what he called covert military operation covered by various secrecy agreements. So they were basically making bogus videos, putting them out through the Middle Eastern news channels, and then tracking people as they watched those videos.
We're talking about propaganda.
We are talking about not only propaganda, which in itself is bad enough, but then the use of that propaganda as a tool for tracking people's opinions and what people are sharing and all this kind of stuff.
And did this propaganda include executions and beheadings, we wonder?
I don't know, but certainly it would be that type of thing. And of course, I mean, this is exactly what we're seeing with the white helmets. This is exactly the same type of operation, and that's why this article in the Times and on the Bureau of Investigative Journalism's website is so important. So if you haven't read it, go and read it, because of course, as this article in 21st Century Wire is pointing out, the white helmets operation is exactly the same type of operation. So this is Tony Cartalucci on 21st Century Wire saying, recent protests held across North America and Europe, staged by supporters of armed militants in Syria, have staged scenes in Western streets eerily similar to those featured in the photos and videos of the US European-funded Syrian civil defense, also known as the White Helmets. And this photograph on the screen at the moment, he is saying, is not Aleppo, but it's the streets of Europe, where a recent Save Aleppo protest was staged. Actors posing in fake dust and blood prove just how easy it is for anyone to create war victims anytime, anywhere. So read the rest of the article. Very, very interesting. And reiterating, sort of backing up what we've been saying about the white helmets for many months. But this fits in very nicely with that article from the Times.
Indeed. Well, just to continue the theme of what we get told and is it the truth, let's have a look at this one. So the basic fact of this BBC article is correct, that there's now been a decision that the Trident nuclear submarines, the ballistic nuclear submarines, are going to be replaced. I think it's with a £38 billion deal for 4 submarines. So nuclear submarines construction set to start. Nicely timed, Mike, because of course this in the public mind can help ramp up the so-called threat from Russia. And this is the statement from Michael Fallon. This shows the government will never gamble with our national security. Now, I thought this was a really interesting statement from this man. So let's get him on screen. Here he is. And we'll just remind ourselves of what his government has been up to, because all 3 services have been cut to levels where they are no longer viable for any sort of conflict, small operations or linked in with other EU countries. Yes, and that was the intention. They got rid of all the Nimrod aircraft. So this statement that we're bringing in the order for the Orions, this is jammed tomorrow. They destroyed the operational aircraft carriers. They destroyed the Harriers, and we're waiting for the replacement of the defective F-35Bs to come in. They've destroyed recruiting, and they've got serious problems with highly skilled NCOs. This is causing a huge problem, particularly on the warships. And we've got problems with equipment and spares. And this man says this shows the government will never gamble with our national security. These people have become either they're living in their own reality, or they simply lie to the extent that they don't know the difference between lies and truth. And of course, we couldn't have a better example than that, than our local Conservative MP, Gary Streeter, who said in a local article, one of the local papers, that really truth, well, it's what you believe. So one person's version of the truth completely different from another. So Tory MPs now don't know what the truth is, not interested in the truth. So propaganda and lies to the public. It's pretty easy. And we'll just remind viewers of this one we reported a little while ago. So Johnny Mercer, he was getting upset because British troops are now facing criminal investigations, having been there and put their lives at risk. But of course, he's an MP serving with the very government doing it. He's not resigning or stepping down. Presumably, he's happy with his fat monthly cheque. Well, if you're wondering what can you do to stop all of this, we'll give you a reminder that the British Constitution Group is meeting on the 19th of November in Winchester. The subject is the reasserting the rule of law. So we're saying that law in Britain is broken down. £10 if you order in advance, £20 on the door. We live in a lawless state. What can we do to turn things around? Well, one of the things that will be discussed, of course, is the need to network with good people. And we're getting a large number of calls these days where people are saying, we can see it, we are desperately worried about the state of UK, but what on earth can we do? To which we are always saying, start to get out and meet other people and network with good people. This is a very easy and important thing to do because groups can spread. And I'll just say that Theo from the British Constitution Group is particularly interested to hear from anybody who would like to help kickstart networks in Milton Keynes, Lincoln, Chichester and Totnes. So if you're in any of those areas and you're in that bracket, what can you do? Get in touch with Theo at the British Constitution Group.
Okay, tonight on the live stream, Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30 p.m. Ian Crane will be speaking to Pippa King on the surveillance state in the UK. And at 9 o'clock, Fracking Nightmare. So that is with Helen Bender as the guest. And Helen Bender's continuing her father's campaigning, her late father's campaigning against the coal seam gas industry in Australia. So there are some coal seam gas licenses in the UK. So that's what that's about at 9 o'clock tonight. So join us beginning at 7:30 for Ian's live programs.
Excellent.
Okay, so Philip Hammond, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, he is going to reset the fiscal policies in this country, apparently, and he's going to, well, first of all, he's abandoning the decision by Osborne to try to get the government finances in surplus by 2020 because he's decided that's just completely impossible. He's going to be borrowing an extra £2 billion to push into housing construction because, of course, they're selling off all the social housing in this country for a song, so they've got to try and rebuild some. And he's saying that, make no mistake, the task of fiscal consolidation must continue, and it must happen within the context of a clear, credible fiscal framework that will anchor expectations, control day-to-day public spending, deliver value for money, and get us back to living within our means. And that's what he means when he says he's not going to get the government in surplus by 2020, and he's going to spend £2 billion more.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know what else to do but laugh at that stage.
Indeed.
It's pantomime.
Yes, it is, yes. And let's remember that Deutsche Bank continues to rattle on. It's death rattle at the moment for some reason. So they are still determined to make this settlement with the US government by the time the US election happens. They want it all done and dusted, but they're still refusing to pay the $14 billion fine for mis-selling mortgage-backed securities that the Department of Justice is demanding. Of course, they don't have any money for it. And there's more indication of how much money they don't have over the weekend because yesterday, Bild, the German newspaper, reported that Deutsche Bank's clients had been locked out of removing cash from ATMs because they had an IT glitch. And I mean, this isn't staggering how many IT glitches some of the top banks are having at the moment. I think RBS began that process of having IT glitches as an excuse for not giving out any money when you don't have any money to give out. Banks are closed today. It's a public holiday in Germany, so nobody really knows what's going to continue to happen to. There's no stock trading today, so until the US opens this afternoon, we won't know what's going to happen to Deutsche Bank's shares. But as this article here on Wall Street on Parade blog is pointing out, it's not liquidity that's the main problem here. Although there are serious liquidity problems, the point here is that Deutsche Bank is in a relatively better position with regard to liquidity compared to RBS, for example, as we mentioned. And this is what was being hinted by the Deutsche's chief executive last week when he was bragging that they have 20 million clients. But this article here is pointing out that once hedge funds and other people start removing money from the bank, particularly from derivatives deals, it is reducing banks' liquidity and it's increasing the pressure on the banks as a result. And they're saying that the sudden withdrawals, when those sudden withdrawals from Deutsche Bank got out last week, which forced Deutsche Bank's chief executive to make his statement that we covered on Friday. The key point here is it's not Deutsche Bank that's the biggest problem. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, they have huge derivatives exposure. And probably the counterparty in this is Deutsche Bank. But it's those banks that are going to suffer most whenever Deutsche Bank fails to meet its obligations with the derivatives exposure that there is out there. So we keep our eye on it, and many people expected Deutsche Bank perhaps to go under this past weekend, but they switched the ATMs off and managed to push it back for another week, perhaps.
I'm smiling here, Mike, because I just wanted to say, well, I'm really surprised that this is happening because, of course, Julia Middleton, the chief executive of the government's favourite political charity, the charity that's been training all of our top civil servants, Julia Middleton praised East German bankers. She praised Lehman Brothers. She had the support of Deutsche Bank and these other very big banks. I just can't believe that all the banks that Julia Middleton has pushed as being the leaders, that the role model for our children, that these banks are now suddenly collapsing. Perhaps we should bring Julia Middleton in to help personally sort out the problem, Mike.
Speechless. Okay.
We've dealt with money, so let's follow the other side of the coin as to what's happening politically. And UK column maintains that's child abuse and blackmail through child abuse. Now, we were very interested to pick up on the comments from this lady, Sarah Ogilvie. She's Liberty Policy Officer, and she's written an article which is extremely interesting, and I'm going to give her credit in the first instance. Because she's picked up on the fact that a children and social work bill, which is being considered at the moment, apparently gives councils the ability to opt out of what is law. So if these local councils decide, well, we don't actually like a particular part of the law, they will simply have a discussion with the Home Secretary, and then they can opt out for 3 years, possibly with an extension of another 3 years, while they do their own thing in the best interests of the child. So we could label this, we've got child protection is about to be above the law. Well, I think actually it's outlaw, because the law isn't going to apply to local councils, so they can get on and do their own thing. Now, this is legislation, I think, which is desperately trying to move towards the named person scheme. That obviously hasn't worked north of the border in Scotland, so we need to drive it in under the radar in UK. But just to keep focused, we thought we'd take a little look at Sarah and see where she's come from. Well, of course, in the first instance, she's now the policy officer for Liberty. But if you have a look at the site, it tells you quite quickly that she was previously involved with the Low Commission. I hadn't heard of this, but not to worry, Mike, because it's an independent commission. It's independent of government. and they're looking at disadvantaged people and how we can make them happy. I don't know why that's true, because the government's got it all under control. So who supports the Low Commission? Well, the Trust for London. I encourage people to go and have a look at that, make your own mind up. We've got the old favourites here, Esme Fairbairn. So these are the think tanks which are constantly manipulating laws and policies. We didn't ask them to, but they've got our best interests at heart. We've got Barrow Cadbury Trust, another one there, very big in the social change agenda, whether we like it or not. And this one I found particularly interesting. We got the Lankelly Chase. So this is another trust, all for our benefit, of course. And where did they come from? Well, fascinating that they were originally set up by Barings Bank. I think they went bust, Mike, didn't
Yes.
they? Very unfortunate, but not to worry, because their good work's been picked up by another bank, ING, from the Netherlands.
They're just sacking 7,000 people.
They do happen to be sacking 7,000 people, absolutely right, but everything's fine in the banking industry, as Common Purpose has told us. These are the future leaders. So if we have a look at the Liberty site, they've got this page where everybody's saying that they believe in, what does it say? They believe in justice. So here's all these happy people, including Sarah herself, saying that she believes in justice. But I'm a little bit suspicious as to who's really pushing this policy through. Encourage our viewers and listeners to do the research yourself. My question is, who is Liberty, really, and who are these people? Well, let's remind ourselves, if we go back to 2014, Liberty was under the spotlight because people were saying, well, wait a minute, this is the former National Council for Civil Liberties, which was actively promoting the paedophile information exchange. And of course, they were desperately trying to normalise child abuse. So this is part of that article. And what the Mail was highlighting is in the red encircled area is an advert for NCCL Liberty. And that advert just happened to appear on the page of a paedophile magazine. So graphic picture in its way of the young boy in his sports strip, and the Mail quite rightly saying, well, hang on a minute, who is Liberty and what have they been doing? Well, if you can remember that, we should certainly be remembering this lady, because she gives us a bit more of a clue as to what's going on. So Barbara Hewson QC, friend of the BBC, who was busy saying that the age of consent should be lowered to 13. And what we say with this, of course, is this is absolutely the thin end of the wedge, because if the age of consent is 13, then they were 11 and it doesn't really matter. It was a bit unfortunate. They were only 11, only 10 in fact, but no problem. So here we have a QC who is clearly an apologist for those who'd like to abuse children. And the BBC is a very big fan of hers. So step in this article from the Mirror, and they've picked up that BBC Radio 1 invites a paedophile rapper onto the Annie Mac show, and this is all to do with his hottest record in the world, rapper Taylor Harris, who calls himself Bonkers. Great for the BBC, Mike. This is how we should be educating the nation's children through music. And what's the BBC got to say? Well, it's not just the little girl, 13-year-old girl that he got involved with. The BBC said here, we weren't aware of Bonkers' personal history before he became a rapper, and we would expect anything of this nature to be flagged by an artist's management. So I think they're saying it's not our fault, and we weren't aware of Savile. We weren't aware that this man was actually on a sex offenders list. And if you're thinking this is pretty incredible, then we can follow it through a bit more, because the article brought out this. It said the court heard Harris from Croydon, South London, trailed his victim on a bicycle. He was also jailed for 3 years in 2011 for his part in the kidnap and torture of a disabled man in a ransom plot. He admitted false imprisonment and blackmail. And the BBC thinks that this is what the license fee is for, is to help promote criminals.
Well, the BBC last night on BBC Two had Louis Theroux programme on all about Jimmy Savile.
We're going to give him a mention, Mike.
Okay.
We're going to give him a mention. So let's bring in Jimmy Savile. BBC had no idea, of course, that he was up to anything unpleasant. So here's your article, Mike. So disturbing footage shows Jimmy Savile groping teenage girl while being filmed by Louis Theroux while at a restaurant. The video isn't up on the Sun. This is a still taken from it. But what they say in the text is that if you watch Savile, he's basically groping the girl's bottom and rubbing himself against her. And of course, Louis was there. So we say, of course, you knew BBC. That's why you need the wider cover-up. But the Sun isn't letting up on it because they've got a picture of Louis himself. What does he have to say? Well, he says that he developed something of a friendship with Savile. And Savile is said to have abused 1,000 victims over 6 decades. We'll remember that figure of 1,000. So Louis Theroux had a friendship with him. And tomorrow night, apparently, BBC Two, they're going to have a programme on Savile, which some of the abuse survivors have accused Louis of being gullible. I think that is a gross simplification of what's really going on here, Mike.
Well, he was certainly giving Savile's family plenty of platform to tell us all that it wasn't possible that Jimmy Savile did what everybody says he did.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's remember that 1,000 victims. And let's get on to this, because, of course, we're now really seeing the mainstream press go in order to get the child sexual abuse inquiry closed down. So they're focusing in on what's been happening. Time is running out to save the child abuse inquiry. That's the nudge to get the thing squashed. And this is part of the text. So what is the problem and why are so many sensible senior people unable to address it? The answer lies in our question about history. The inquiry has a mandate so broad that its investigations can never be finished and its work can never be deemed a success. So this is the Telegraph skewing the thing away from the reality of massive abuse of children, which is covered up. Not we need to structure the inquiry to deal with the scale of the problem. The scale of the problem is ridiculous, so we'll shut down the inquiry. And in this article, this is where it was really brought home for me. They take you through a chronology, a timeline, saying who was heading it up at what point and when they left. And then we get to the fourth appointment here, Professor Alexis J., former social worker. And the bit that I'm particularly interested is here. She says that with regard to Rotherham, there were at least 1,400 victims, 1,400 that she knows of in Rotherham alone. And then if we bring up the Telegraph article, the first thing it whinges about is 18 million spent and nothing has progressed. Well, that's probably fair enough criticism. But here we have something very interesting because it says to date, the CSA inquiry has got 2,000 abuse victims that have come forward. So I think to myself, 2,000 that have come forward, does that include the 1,400 in Rotherham alone? And we've got the 1,000 for Jimmy Savile. So in a worst case, we're up to 4,500 children here. But nobody wants to talk about the scale of it. And what we've now got is basically the survivors groups are walking away from the investigation. So what do I think the drive is by the mainstream media is to get this inquiry closed down. They need it closed down, of course, in order to protect the high-level abusers, which includes politicians, judges, police, members of the establishment. And those are the real people that need protecting. So the picture is coming home quite clearly. Wherever we look, whether it's financial matters or child abuse, It is pure lies by the British government. We've got further lies over the situation in Afghanistan and Syria. And of course, we've got the constant lies over China. Just remind me, is a threat or a benign power? It's confusing, Mike. I'm confused. We'll run a lottery on that. And of course, Russia remains the source of all the world's evil. It would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. We'll end on that note. Don't forget, Ian Crane will be on tonight, and also the 19th of November for that British Constitution Group conference in Winchester. And we will be announcing speakers over the coming days. And we have some extremely good people taking part in that event. Thanks very much for joining us. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.